Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Unreal Engine livestream. I'm your host Alexander Pascal. Joining me today is Daniel Wright, and we're going to be talking about volumetric fog. But before we get into all of that, first, it's the news. Let's jump into this one really quick. So first of all, of course, Unreal Engine is going to be at E3. Yay, because we have the E3 awards powered by GamesBeat. So just like every year, we have some pretty cool stuff going out. Every winning team of this will be getting a NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 Ti graphics card provided by NVIDIA.
Oh, wow.
And if you are interested, sir, you can intro yourself right here. You can get yourself... You want the 1080, right?
It's like the best video card ever made.
Yeah, it's actually, that's probably accurate. So
It's at this point.
yeah, for right now, there's like someone in the future going to be watching this archive like, whatever.
As a graphics programmer, it's pretty exciting.
Oh yeah, but there's lots of categories that you can win. So please, if you have a cool game, enter it. You could be winning something very cool. And also, check us out around E3. I think last year, Daniel Kaiser here did a ton of interviews. So our YouTube account like blew up with interviews to check out. Same thing here. Check out the LA meetup while you're at E3 to also have a chance to win this. Oh, actually, yeah. They're going to be holding a casual meetup here. You can join people, and yeah, I think there's another chance to win another graphics card. So that's actually pretty incredible. So that just makes me wonder who it is that's going to have to fly over there with all those graphics cards, and because
And distribute them?
yeah, I figure that must be Chance. He's going to be stuck like carrying a giant crate of graphics cards and be like, don't bother with what these are. They're not really
You can pay
expensive.
me in graphics cards.
to transport the
We'll code for
graphics cards. yeah, that's fair. I could see that as being very fair, actually.
It's the new currency.
Yeah, graphics card. Yeah, it's like 3 graphics cards for your groceries. Sure. Also, Fabrice Borley has announced a second architectural visualization webinar. We've been doing a lot more in conjunction with people who make webinars, who make online training content. So please check out another really great ArcViz tutorial as it comes out. So those are our few news items. Another thing just to kind of be aware of, 4.16 will have a hotfix that'll be coming out pretty soon. They were thinking that it might be ready in time for the news today, but probably not. So be on the lookout for a 4.16.1 patch. So, all right, next up is the Community Spotlight. Yay! We just went I just noticed there was like a thing where we were here. It says we went live. Good for us. It was our own alert letting us know that we went live. So let's see here. When you get, like someone goes live on YouTube, we get like an email. So we got a pop-up for ourselves. It's very meta, isn't it, Clint? So let's see here. Every week, we like to highlight the top karma earners of answers.unrealengine.com, where you can come in and ask questions and give answers, as the name implies. If you give answers, then you can earn karma by getting upvotes and approved answers, etc. And when you get that karma, you end up on this high scoreboard, which adds up the past 7 days of karma and pulls it all up to the top here. So the top 3 karma earners will be getting forum badges if they don't already have them, and they can even get prestige forum badges for getting the top 3 position 3 times. Everybody else will like to give shout outs too. So this week, Noctmar, again, you're on the list. Good for you. I'm pretty sure that you're super prestige at this point. Extra Life Matt, hi and welcome back. Red Box, you've been up here quite a bit lately. Kiplinger, nice to see you again. Deathray, same, just good to see you up here again. Mariyoshi-san, hey, you're back up. You disappeared for a couple weeks, now you're back. It's good to see you. Scott Spadia, you're up there pretty frequently. Gigasite Media, I want to say you're new for me. You might have been up here once before, but Gigasite Media, thank you so much. Black Phoenix, you're a regular as well. And Gen V, you guys have also become regulars. So we have a lot of regulars up here. So if you haven't ever had a shout out before, maybe it's your time to strike, because these guys are getting a little bit, safe right now. So those are our karma earners. You 3 up top will be getting badges. I actually think that you all have badges already, but you might be getting prestige badges. I'll check my numbers. Next up is our community spotlight. So the first thing that we want to show off is Blood Ancestors. It's a new Kickstarter. These guys asked to get shown off a bit because they just kicked off their Kickstarter project. Got 28 days to go. They have a pretty modest, 56,000, pretty modest Kickstarter goal. They're already kind of picking up numbers with 17 backers. But come check it out. If you like games that are in the esports kind of field, this is an arena fighting game with a lot of kind of goals and tasks where you have to turn on things and turn off things. Relics, bad guys attack you from every direction, and other players are trying to either stop you from activating relics, or you're trying to get them activated. And it's kind of a cool like arena fighting game with class-based combat mechanics and 3 different factions. There you go, like an overview of the map idea there. But let's see here. This is kind of neat. They have a breakdown of, there you go, all the different award tiers. And you can get some really nice stuff, of course. It's a pretty solid Kickstarter with one of those like really big, every Kickstarter needs like one of those goals. It's like several $1,000s. Come hang out with us and design a character or whatever.
Right.
So they're good here. And yay, there's the team. So good work, guys, on kicking that off. Thank you so much for bringing it to my attention. If anyone out there is also kicking off your own Kickstarter or has a new cool game project they'd like to show off, send it my way. I'd like to talk about it on the live stream and put you in the launcher, even if it's super awesome like this. So that's Blood Ancestors. Next up, Rinjan. Rinjan put out a really nice little tutorial here on the forums for a Witcher 3 inspired portal. Rinjan's been working on a new game, Pantheon. I had to help myself out there. Pantheon, which is really nice, and I'll show that off in a second too. But this is really a fun tutorial, complete with a breakdown and explanation of exactly how the material is set up, notes in between, and of course like a final product. I think there's also there's a nice Twitter picture of it as well. That's that's not it, but there was.
Is that new?
He had a Twitter picture of the actual like animated GIF up, but that one's not animated. But yes, also come check out Rinjan's Cartridge page. Cartridge is a really cool platform for game developers. If you haven't checked it out yet, it's a good place to kind of put up your portfolio where you can see how nice and clean it is. This is what I was looking for. So there you go, just to show off what it looks like.
Nice in 3D.
Yeah, it looks all depthy, and then haha, no, it's just it's just a card. So it's very cool. And thank you so much for writing a tutorial on how to recreate it. In a similar vein, Caesar has written another great tutorial here on switching weapons. A full breakdown is provided through Google, of course, but you can see here from the photos roughly what you'll be building is a system where you have different melee weapons, you have a UI element that displays which weapon has been selected and is being shown off and used. It's very good for a variety of like third-person fighting games or first-person fighting games, but if you've ever had any kind of weapon selection menu, this is just a good way to kick it off and get started. So thank you so much, Caesar, for your tutorial. And those are all the community spotlights and news items that we have for the week. So that means I get to take this and rotate it over here and give the show away to Daniel. So thank you so much, first of all, for coming on. Everyone's really excited for this 416 feature, and first off, we know that it's got a lot of power behind it, but you probably want to show off how to actually set it up and what all it can do. But
So
we have
I have
some
screenshots to show first.
Oh, okay, cool.
I don't know, that's the easy part.
Oh, we already have this one. Hey, can we take the picture away for a second so we can get a full image of everything? There we go.
So yeah, I just wanted to show like how Volumetric Fog is working in some of our projects first, and then talk about some of its features. So this is Fortnite, and all the cars, and Fortnite has completely dynamic lighting, so it doesn't have any baked lighting. It has a movable directional light and a movable skylight with distance fields enabled, and so distance field ambient occlusion is shadowing the skylight. And it has a bunch of spotlights in there for street lights and car lights, and you can see like the lights on this car are lighting up the fog. That's something we only got with Volumetric Fog. Before those, they didn't have any scattering on them. So like Fortnite has time of day, and as the time of day changes, the fog color changes, the light colors change, and that works really well with Volumetric Fog. It just kind of like brings out the depth of the scene. And you can also, because there's time of day, you can make it like really foggy only in the 10 minutes of dawn, and then the rest of the time you keep the fog more subtle so that you can actually play the game. volumetric fog creates light shafts. Of course, there's still the screen space light shafts working, which is most of what actually you're seeing here. But volumetric fog works even when you view it from an angle, so it's a more accurate method than screen space light shafts. And this is kind of showing like how volumetric fog brings the lights in the scene out. Like it really emphasizes them. Like the stoplight has all that in-scattering glow around it, and the cars, the headlights, and then of course like the sun casting shadows through the pillars up there. And then, yeah, this is showing an example of like seeing the light shafts from the side. They still show up because it's not a screen space technique. It actually ray marches along each vector from your eye for each pixel, and picks up the scattering that happens at each point in space. And then, okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the features that are supported. So this is kind of like a whole nother lighting system that we have to do at every point in space. So we can only support lighting features that we've actually like gone out of our way to write the code for. So it's not like everything just works automatically. It's only the things that we've implemented. And there's a list of them on the doc page, which I'll bring up in a little bit. But the main ones are directional light, supports cascaded shadow maps, and it supports a light function. And then point and spotlights support dynamic shadowing, and then also static shadowing. And also particle lights are supported. I think that is the extent of all the lighting features that can support it, or that affect the volumetric fog. So the most notable one that does not work yet is pre-computed lighting. So if you have a game with light maps and baked lighting, if you have a static skylight or any static lights, they won't affect the fog when they're built. And also, just like the skylight itself won't affect the fog. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit when we get to the...
Yeah, it definitely requires a little bit of setup. You can't just like throw a checkbox and assume everything will instantly light up the fog, right?
Yeah, and sometimes, so for example, like ray trace distance field shadows do not yet affect the fog. So if you're using these features which aren't supported yet, you just won't get a shadow from it. So here I want to show how the light function works. This is the directional light function. Fortnite has this really cool kind of like wispy light function, and it adds a lot of it's acting like cloud shadows basically, but like stylized cloud shadows, because they're not just like cloud blobs. And it actually, the cloud shadows actually affects the volumetric fog, which adds a lot of interest when you're actually like playing the game. This is just a screenshot, but when you're actually like playing the game, the cloud shadows are all animated, and you can see the light shafts moving through the volumetric fog animated. So the way that's done is we first render out the light shaft, or sorry, the light function to a 2D texture, and then project that onto the volume so that it's very efficient. It actually costs almost nothing. And then this one, I wanted to show that the sky is actually occluded properly if you're using distance field ambient occlusion. So here in Fortnite, I turned up the fog to be really strong, and it's nighttime right now, so like the directional light is not shown. It's all skylight. And notice that even though the fog is really strong, it's not showing up indoors. That's because the skylight is being occluded properly by distance field ambient occlusion. So I thought that part was cool. That's why I just wanted to show that. So now I'm going to go over to Paragon, which has a more realistic art style. Fortnite is a bit more stylized. Oh, this takes a while.
Yeah, it's the Windows 10 image viewer.
Quality software. So this is the origin level, which I'm going to mess around in a little bit later. It's the tutorial level of Paragon. And this game uses pre-computed lighting. So only the directional light is actually affecting the fog here. Notice that the fog is actually kind of black anywhere where the directional light, it's like darkening the scene anywhere that the directional light isn't affecting. That's because we do not yet have our baked GI affecting the fog. It really shouldn't be black. It should be like whatever the sky color is. But here I just like turned on the volumetric fog and kind of like jacked it up. And like, you see how detailed the shadows are from the foliage? That's because I turn on cascaded shadow maps near the camera. Cascaded shadow maps give a lot more detail than the static shadowing that stationary lights use. But both dynamic shadowing and static shadowing are supported by the volumetric fog. So even if you don't turn on cascaded shadow maps, you still get these light shafts. And this, I just placed some colored lights around to show that they all create in scattering in the fog.
It looks great.
You can make it really moody at night, basically. I think this is gonna be.
This needs to be
used
a
in
real
lot of
map.
games.
This needs to be
It
like
is-
a.
It is a real.
Well, I
map,
mean,
but
like
it's
like with the
important.
lighting like this. Like this
Oh,
needs
with the
to-
lighting, I guess.
Like
I
we
hope
need
they
like
do.
a an eerie. Yeah.
Jordan Walker, who's the lead artist on Paragon.
Oh, we've had him on before. Yeah, I love Jordan.
He loves, like, he was so excited for this, and when I first showed him it working and like, you know, put lights in here. Obviously, this is like the lights are like programmer art here because I set them up, and obviously when the Paragon artists get their hands on it, they're gonna make it way more awesome. But yeah, I think it is going to make a big difference in Paragon in the future. This is a scene set up by Jordan, and
Thanks, Clint.
of course, it looks awesome. So this is showing how like you can have the fog just be in a low line area. I'll show how that works in a little bit. It's basically you make particles using a volume material, and then wherever those particles are is where the fog will be stronger. So this is cool because you can have the fog subtle for the whole level. It's not like blocking your vision, so you can still play the game, but yet you still get some fog only in those like low line areas.
Yeah.
And then when you actually go down there, then you actually start to see the light shafts in it. Notice how the light shafts in the air match up with where the shadows land on the ground, unlike the screen space light shafts, where they just like had no grounding whatsoever in reality. These ones kind of guide your eye as to where the light's going through the scene.
Yeah, and I really like how, like you were talking about with this, the particle effect can be used kind of to kind of blow out it a little bit to show off like certain areas and not just use the full area, which you also kind of demonstrate that in a little bit too. And I think that's going to be pretty useful for a ton of games where you don't want general fog, you just want an area that's smoky.
Yeah, it's easiest to turn it on everywhere, which is why, you know, that's the first thing you're ever going to do is just turn on globally. But then, you know, you kind of have this conflict between making the light shafts look noticeable and actually being able to see your enemies to play the game. So you don't really want to just like turn it on, jack it up everywhere. You want to just like place higher density areas. So now I'm going to talk about some of the, you know what, I'm actually kind of getting ahead of myself here, talking about the material. I should first talk about the actual settings of the volumetric fog. The way you enable it is just this checkbox on the exponential fog component. So you have to place an exponential fog actor in your level, and then you have to turn up the density so it's something noticeable, and then you turn on volumetric fog. And it will remove, see this view distance setting here? It will remove up to 6,000 units of exponential fog and replace that with simulated volumetric fog lighting. So that's how it works. Basically, by removing the global fog, or removing the one that you're used to using, the exponential height fog, and replacing it with simulated volumetric fog. And then there's a few other settings on here which are not super important, but they're kind of fun to play with. I'll show you what scattering distribution does in the editor. It's easier to demonstrate it live. Albedo is the reflectiveness of the particles in the air. It's kind of like water particles are usually close to white, while smog and haze have a yellower tint, and then you get that like really dark smoke that comes out of fires. That would be closer to black here. Those are kind of like the settings you want to use for albedo. And then extinction scale it allows you to make the volumetric fog more dense than the global exponential height fog. So probably the most important of these settings after turning it on is the view distance. This is how far the fog will be simulated. So all of this in-scattering from local lights will all just disappear past this distance because we're not simulating the fog anymore. And if you increase this distance too much, then there's too few slices in the volume texture to actually capture the lighting, and you'll start to introduce artifacts and you won't be able to pick up as detailed of of shadows near the camera. So this is kind of this is a trade-off here. You want to set this as small as possible while you don't notice artifacts from the transition at the end distance. It'll be easier to see what I'm talking about when we're running the editor in a minute. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how you set up these volume materials. First of all, is there anything?
We got plenty of questions in here. Well,
gaps?
like, yeah, of course, they're very interested to know about how much this is going to affect performance, and like we discussed before, I was asking you, like, because people brought up VR modes or when you would want to use this. How about mobile? How about where you?
It doesn't work on
but
mobile.
I'll slow myself down a bit here.
VR a little bit later, and I'll talk about performance once we get in the editor, and I can actually like show you.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of what it comes down to. Is we're gonna have to open up the editor in order to explain like a couple of these things.
Okay.
People are asking, like I said before, they'll ask what the FPS is, but you guys have to remember the machine we're running off of has a Titan X and 32 gigs of RAM, so it's not going to be reflective of necessarily what you're working on, unless you have a Titan X with 32 gigs of RAM, which is good for you. That's awesome.
So this is showing the simplest volume material.
Mm-hmm.
So notice over here, the material domain is set to volume. This is a new domain that didn't exist before. Before you can only set it to surface and some other things. So now when you set it to volume, you're actually describing how the light bounces off of each point in space that this material affects. And we're going to apply this to a particle system later, so that's going to say like where in space is affected by this material. So the properties you get is albedo, which is normalized reflectiveness. So it's between 0 and 1, but it's a color. If it's 1, then it's like a water-based particle, like mist or fog, and it's reflecting almost everything. Like clouds reflect almost everything. And if it's a darker color, then it's like smoke or smog. And then emissive color is just for your, it's if you want to make like a flame and it's actually emitting color, it's creating energy through a chemical reaction. Whatever, that doesn't matter. Basically, if you wanted to...
It's very physically accurate to think of it like that, though.
That's the physical explanation. But,
yeah, that's right.
Basically, you set it to be whatever you want it to look like.
Yes.
And then extinction is how much of the light passing through this area gets scattered out of the ray. So it's basically how much of the light behind the effect gets attenuated. So if you set this to really high, then this thing will become very opaque. And if you set it to very low, it'll become very transparent. The reason this is actually in units of world density, it's not between 0 and 1, which is why it's not called opacity, because it actually depends on how far the light travels through the volume material, what the final opacity is. So if you make the particle bigger, it actually gets more opaque.
Oh, well, that would make more sense, because as you're it wouldn't be like a 1-for-1.
It can't be 0 to 1 like opacity, because it's not just one layer. You're actually defining at each point in space how much
density it adds to it. So because you're going to be inside of it, so like it can't just be like you get in it and then everything's perfectly dense everywhere. Which
it makes it a little more complicated to think about that it could be like 0.001, right? That's a valid value. It doesn't have to be between 0 and 1.
I'm going to throw this one out here. The John Terp said, extinction is such a death metal term for a shader output. I like that too. I was actually going to say extinction is a great name.
But these are like the term, if you Google these things, like they are the industry terms for volumetric rendering. So it's not, I didn't just make them up.
Oh, okay. I was going to give you a lot of credit, be like, that's really rad, extinction. Okay, but it's not yours.
No.
Darn.
So it's better to use words that other people already know what they mean rather than make up your own. Anyway, so this is a single particle with this material applied to it. A single particle, this effect is fully volumetric. As you move around it, there's no billboards. All of the shadows stay in the right spot in 3D as you move around it. It's just showing how effective this method is at creating volumetric effects because it's fully 3D. So this material here gets evaluated at a whole bunch of points in a volume texture that's applied to your camera frustum, and so it's not just we're not just rendering a quad. Like a normal particle would just render a quad here.
Yeah.
And you could only make a circle, but we're actually rendering a sphere. There's actually depth to this. So that's why the most important part of the material is this world position input here. You're basically texturing based on world position, and at every point in space, you can give a different value. So you can apply noise, for example, just to break up this sphere pattern. So that's one volume particle. What happens when you place multiple of them? Well, here I did a whole bunch of particles that are on the ground level, a whole bunch of volume particles, and you can see they kind of add like ground fog. Again, this is like programmer art. So an artist would make this look way better, as evidenced by those screenshots from Jordan Walker that I was showing before.
Yeah. But all those gorgeous light shafts.
This shows that you can do it and it works. So you basically only have density near the ground level. And I also added some noise, not through the noise node. Please don't use the noise node for this stuff in the volume material. It's super expensive. What you want to use is a texture lookup that gives you a noise value. And Ryan Brooks he's made a lot of tools to generate that texture value. And he's making a documentation page on exactly how to set that up. It's like a material function that for any world space position gives you a noise value for very cheap.
That's
much
awesome.
Cheaper than using the noise node in the material editor. So I highly recommend that. I guess we'll link to it in the forum thread.
Yeah, whenever it's up and live. Yeah, you guys shoot it my way. I'd love to post that. Everyone loves Ryan, so it's like anything that he makes, I'm sure, is awesome. So. But
that's a really important tool with these volume materials, because you want to break up the sphere shape, right? But you want to do it in a cheap way, and he's basically created a very valuable tool in cheap noise. So these are just showing a bunch of fog particles, and you can even, on this one, I made a GPU particle emitter, and I put gravity on it, which is just a force going down, and I turned on distance field collision. So all of these particles started up in the air up here, because I didn't know exactly where the ground was. It's at different heights. See over here, it's higher. Mm-hmm. And the particles just kind of lowered themselves through gravity until they hit something. And then I ramped up their opacity so that they actually became visible. So it's basically ground fog that's automatically placed through an algorithm, which is to just drop things on the floor and wait until they settle.
That's actually kind of physically accurate also to how how a cloud would become fog.
It's simulating these particles of fog density.
Oh, wow. Oh, whoa, okay.
So you can apply a volume material to a mesh.
I hadn't seen this one yet.
This is not a supported feature. It's just an accident.
This isn't a supported feature. Suddenly it is.
I'm sure a lot of people will try to use this, but it's not supposed to work. It's kind of an accident. I'm just throwing this out here because I reserve the right to change how this works in the future.
Okay, that's fair.
Because it's an accident. The volume material right now...
It's a happy accident. You're like the Bob Ross of clouds right now.
It only really works correctly on particle sprites, where there's a particle radius and a particle center. Or you could... The problem is that it doesn't actually run that volume material on all the points in the mesh. Like inside the mesh, it doesn't run the material at all.
Oh.
It's only running it on the triangles, and even then you get these kind of like line artifacts.
You can kind of see the artifacts, like in the door especially. It kind of pops out oddly.
In summary, don't use this on triangle meshes.
But that front wheel, like whole front section, looks phenomenal, and
it looks pretty cool because it's all shadowed.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's a lot of bugs with this. Just use it on particle systems. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, don't try to do that.
Don't try to make anything awesome.
Cool. All right, are we ready to open it up and show them the thing, or are you gonna open up doc?
Bring up the doc.
Okay, documentation time.
I think Tim Hobson made this awesome doc.
Oh, sweet.
Okay, I want to bring this up to see if I forgot anything, just to be thorough.
Yeah, we'll have to bring Tim on also for a few more lighting streams.
Okay, so each light has two new properties. One of them is how much it's a scale on the scattering. Like it will have some scattering by default, but you can really ramp it up. So you can make a single light have much brighter influence on the fog than it does on the opaque world around it. And then the second setting is cast volumetric shadow. It's off by default for performance reasons. Lights that cast volumetric shadow cost a lot more on the volumetric fog than unshadowed lights, so it's just off by default. But you can turn it on. You usually turn it on for like that one big light in the room that has a really noticeable impact, and leave it off for like if you have hundreds of lights. And then, oh, cool.
Oh, that's
So I made
nice.
this.
You can really see it. Yeah.
So you can use volumetric scattering intensity 0 to effectively turn off a light's influence on the volumetric fog. So that's useful because the volumetric fog uses temporal reprojection to improve the quality, which means that if you actually move these lights quickly, there will be a trail. So for example, like muzzle flashes and flashlights do not work very well with this volumetric fog method.
So, but if I was doing this and I did like this, you ever seen like the car race things? The car comes whipping past real fast and like leaves a trail of like kind of like red lights behind it for style or something.
It
like,
would leave a
it would
trail,
kinda-
but you won't like the trail because
Oh, it's
it
not
won't
gonna be cool like
smooth.
that?
It's not going to be
Aw.
a smooth trail. It's going to be like, depending on your frame rate, you'll see like where the light was those last frames.
I see. I was
So-
kind of hoping it was like an unintentional cool feature. Darn.
So it's cool. It's useful to be able to turn off volumetric fog with setting the intensity to 0 on certain lights. You'll see what I mean when you use it. Like if you try to move the light around quickly, it's not going to work out. Here's the volume material that I talked about. Yeah, we already talked about this. Okay, yeah, the temporal reprojection.
Mhm.
So the way the whole method works is that there's a volume texture that's aligned to your camera, and we're computing lighting at each point in space by looking up into the shadow maps and going over all of the lights that affect it and computing their influence. And then we basically ray march through the volume to the eye, and that gives us like the total amount of fog along each camera ray. So when you put a volume texture on your camera frustum, the problem is that as you move your camera around, each cell maps to a different spot in the world, each frame, and it all starts to crawl. All of the fog starts to crawl. So the temporal reprojection takes last frame's fog and mixes it in with the current frame, and it smooths out that crawling. And I'll show you once we get in the editor how bad that can look with it off. Basically how important the temporal reprojection is. And it's on by default, but yeah, it causes this ghosting thing. If you have a flashlight or muzzle flashes, then you probably want to turn off their scattering influence. Performance, since the whole simulation happens in this volume texture that's attached to your camera, so the resolution of that volume texture is the single biggest thing affecting performance, and that comes from the engine scalability levels. I'll show you in the editor kind of like how that affects the look and the performance.
This is a really good feature just for showing off how the scalability settings really affect something like really dramatically,
They
like
usually
click to click.
don't affect this dramatically. This feature is kind of unique in that because you can directly specify the resolution that it's computed at, you can say exactly how much it costs. Usually things are kind of tied to the screen resolution, right? So like given a certain screen resolution, you're kind of like locked in on what the performance is.
Yeah.
What time is it, by the way?
Oh, you 30.
I should
so
hurry up.
You're good. You're good.
Okay. Yeah, this is talking about all the lighting features that are supported.
You kind of went over that earlier. Yeah.
Here's one thing that I missed. Translucency is affected by the volumetric fog, which means that if you have a translucent sheet halfway through some fog, it will actually be like 50%. 50% of the fog will affect it, but it's only computed per vertex. So if you have like translucent clouds in the background, and you might notice some like triangle-shaped artifacts on them. And to solve this, we added this new material setting, which lets you compute fog per pixel instead of per vertex, which is more expensive, but it solves that artifact. I'm just gonna. Okay, that's the rest of this. I'm gonna get to the editor part.
All right. Yep. Cool. So actually in engine.
So actually, yeah, this is the editor's actually running. And this is in that origin level in Paragon, which is the tutorial level.
Yeah, like if you ever see like any of those like trailers for it, and there's like a really interesting level that's not actually in the full game, this is that one. And it's also what we showed off when we had David Hill on, and we talked about the FDT Bloom stuff.
Okay. Yeah, it's a beautiful level. Our artists made an amazing level. I love it. I use this for all my screenshots now. So I've already set this scene up, and I want to tell you some of the things I did to set it up to make it look good. So it's not just like so you'll know how to set them up for yourself. But I didn't want you to have to like watch me go through it all. So we're just kind of skipping to the end result here. and then I'll talk about the individual things. Okay, so to set it up, first of all, there was already an exponential height fog in here, and you go down and you turn it on. So without
It's just a super powerful fog. Whoa.
without volumetric fog, there's no shadowing of the fog,
Mhm.
so it just, it kind of like permeates through everything. When you turn on volumetric fog, it replaces that exponential height fog up to the view distance you specified. So here I set a really high view distance, which you probably wouldn't want to actually set it this high, but let me show you what happens if you don't set the view distance high enough. This is a very large level. That's one thing to remember. It's huge. It doesn't look that big, but it's huge. So if I set the view distance to 10,000, you can see that line in front of me where the volumetric fog takes over from the global fog.
Yeah, it creates like a wall of like
it creates
cloud.
a wall, and you don't really want to see that wall. So you basically set your view distance high enough that the wall goes away.
You're gonna have to increase the size of that slider.
Yeah, I probably will. You set it high enough that the wall goes away. Now the wall's gone. And then, I really jacked up the fog density in here, but maybe if you were actually like shipping this in a game, you would put it something a bit more subtle. I can see the light shafts, but it's probably hard to see on the stream here. But basically, just keep in mind, I turned it way up just so that it's really obvious, since that's what we're talking about. You wouldn't actually have it that high if you were shipping the game. Okay, so let me talk about what this scattering distribution does. It basically makes it so that it's like how directional is the scattering at each point in space. So at 0, it's not directional at all. So it's the same brightness as if you look at the light shaft from the front, or like looking at the light, or from the side. And because the fog's pretty subtle right now, there isn't a whole lot of fog showing up. And if you turn this closer to 1, now the fog only shows up if I'm looking at the light, and it doesn't show up at all from the side.
Oh.
So maybe you want to find something in between, like 0.2, and now you see some fog from the side, and it's a bit brighter in the direction of the light, but not like all your light over there.
That can definitely be very useful for stylizing things, or for intentionally like blowing out the screen if you need to. That's cool.
And then let's see, albedo is kind of like it's like what's the global haze reflectivity, and like I was saying, water particles usually have a value close to 1, so I'm just going to leave that at 1. Emissive is what you use because there's no pre-computed GI affecting the fog. If your emissive is black and your fog is strong, see how it's getting black here where the directional light's not affecting the fog?
Yeah.
And if that's not the look you want, you can add some emissive in there to compensate for it. And hopefully in the future we'll have actual pre-computed lighting affecting the fog, and then you won't have to do this. This is basically a hack to add some constant ambient term to work around the fact that there's no pre-computed GI affecting the fog yet.
Yeah, and that is a question, was about pre-computed lighting and pre-baked lighting, and how that affects fog. And at this time, it's not affecting it, right?
It's not affecting it at all. The pre-computed shadowing does work. I'll show you that in a second. But the pre-computed GI does not. Okay, so extinction scale just lets you make the volumetric fog much stronger than the actual global fog was set to. And let's just ignore this one because it's not important for this particular project that I'm in. So now I wanted to talk about.
You put a bunch of different lights in the particle system that you use to localize it. There's like a bunch of different light types, because we put in the particle light.
I want to talk about the shadowing.
And we definitely want to, the shadowing. But we definitely want to talk about how to set up a particle light so it affects the volumetrics and all that too.
Yeah, well, okay. Thanks for the reminder.
No.
Okay, so here I've got our stationary directional light. First, I want to show that I turned off. Notice that I turned off light shafts to demonstrate this volumetric fog, because the light shafts, when you're looking at the light, they kind of look like the volumetric fog, but they're not. So it can be hard to tell which one you're actually tweaking. So right now, that was light shafts, and the remainder is volumetric fog. So I turned these off for this demonstration just to make it obvious which one we're looking at. Okay, Okay, sorry, hold on. I gotta go back and turn up the fog a little bit to make it a little bit more noticeable. The differences between changes. That looks good.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the directional light. So this is a stationary directional light, and by default, a stationary directional light uses only static shadowing, and so right now we're getting light shafts from static shadowing, but they're not very precise. See, this bush isn't even in there at all. It doesn't even have shadows, and the shadows on the ground are kind of soft. So what you can do is you can turn on cascaded shadow maps by setting dynamic shadow distance to something like 10,000, and notice that the shadow from this bush just got way sharper, and the shadow on the ground got sharper, and so now our volumetric fog, it's using the same shadow map that the shadow on the ground uses, so it gets more detailed. So let me just toggle between it again. So this was the static shadowing. This is not very precise, and then this was the cascaded shadow maps. So that's because the stationary directional light allows you to use cascaded shadow maps near the camera and stick to static shadowing far from the camera where it would have been expensive.
People are wondering, are any of these settings, or color specifically is what they're asking about, but are any settings here alterable at runtime, like when you're actually in the middle of the game?
Yeah, actually everything is alterable at runtime.
Cool.
This is a fully dynamic method. So like if I change the light color,
yeah,
see,
so
it just changed the fog.
that would be really great. Like you go into battle and then the color of the fog
Absolutely.
kind of alters for it or
So
something.
Fortnite is all time of day. It's all dynamic, all time of day, and all this volumetric fog works fine there. And like as the time of day changes, the sky and the sun colors change, and that affects the fog directly. The only thing you have to remember is that like because there's this temporal reprojection on it, it won't update super quickly. So maybe I can
Try to stay like a step ahead of what you need to be at. Oh yeah, you got to turn off the selection view.
Yeah, the swivel selection highlight. So like see this trail behind it?
Uh-huh.
That's the temporal reprojection that I was talking about. So you can't make super
okay.
fast moving stuff in it, but you can still move stuff in it. Like if it's moving this fast, then like nobody notices.
Yeah, so that would look really great, like if you have a guard walking around with a torch or something, versus like the flashlight, which we're going to whip around too quickly.
Yeah.
It's going to look
and
weird.
especially because it's going to be connected to the player, the
Yeah,
input device. Okay, so let's talk about
cool.
local lights. So there was a spotlight. There was a spotlight under here, and it automatically just affects the fog and gets picked up. And I don't remember what else. Oh yeah, particle lights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is a particle system here, and it has a particle light in it.
This is Grimmex's ultimate that we're digging through right now.
It has a particle light. This little thing here, module, is a particle light module, and to get it to affect the volumetric fog, you have to come down here and set volumetric scattering intensity to 1. It starts out at 0 by default, and the reason it's off by default is because particles are usually moving around pretty fast, and the temporal reprojection leaves some trails. But it does work. You just have to come in here. Particle lights do affect the volumetric fog. You just have to come in here and actually turn it on. And now, if these particle lights were moving around, you would see them affecting the fog, and yeah. Okay, so now I want to show what happens if you don't have an outdoor level. Maybe you have an indoor level. Put a point light in here somewhere.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah,
You just have to
okay.
check it on.
So if let's say you have an indoor level. That's so bright.
It is very powerful.
And by default, it's going to look like...
We really need some mysterious music and like an alien that comes crawling out of the
Yeah,
light.
it's very alien-y.
It's Steven Spielberg-y.
By default, it looks like this. See how there's no shadowing behind this pillar here? And it just doesn't quite have the same awesome parallax look to it. You have to actually turn on cast volumetric shadow on a point light to get shadowing from it. And now you get these awesome, they're not God rays because it's not from the sun, but these awesome like shadowed volumetric light shafts. So yeah, you can just place lights, and it will just work with the volumetric fog, and they can be shadowed. Okay, so what else was I going to show?
Did you show off the clouds of particles?
that's right,
The
okay.
dust clouds and
So
how
let's say
how those work?
Let me turn this guy back off.
And then we'll get into some Q&A.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm
No, you're
close to
doing
good.
great. This is awesome.
I didn't write up a schedule, so
That
it's
is
hard for
pretty
me to
cool, like when you
remember.
turn it invisible and everything kind of like fades out.
I'm glad you think that's cool because it's
I know
actually an
it's technically an artifact. I know. I think that even if it's an artifact, maybe you should have a checkbox to leave it for the sake of like style, because that'd be
Oh
very
yeah, I
cool.
haven't shown. I totally forgot to show performance this whole time. Okay.
Oh yeah, so
So this is important.
yes.
Okay, so the resolution is controlled by these three guys here. Shadow, high is the lowest that volumetric fog is even on. If you go down to medium, it's off.
Hmm.
High is the lowest that it's on. This is like console settings. Epic is like high NPC, and cinematic is like I'm gonna take a screenshot.
Yeah, or like pre-render it out. Yeah,
Yeah.
all pre-rendered.
So
It's a
so-
massive difference too.
yeah, so we're gonna put on Epic, and then we're gonna do a profile GPU,
It's a profile GPU. There's a
and we
friend.
just measured the GPU cost of the scene. Of course, it depends on the screen resolution, so you usually want to do like F11 before you do that. And we're gonna look at the cost of the volumetric fog, and on Epic settings, since this is like the fastest GPU ever, it's like a 1080,
What, this?
isn't it?
No, this is a Titan X.
Okay, it's a Titan X,
Which is actually
still,
it's very
extremely
high end, but I think a
fast
1080 is
GPU. It's like
actually
a $1,000
technically
GPU.
better.
So even on Epic settings, it was only half a millisecond.
Yeah.
You can see the resolution that the volume was at, 124 by some other stuff.
Yeah.
You can see, so these are the three steps that are in here. The first one is just setting up the volume. The second one is actually computing lighting at every point in space. And the third one is propagating the fog to your eye. So what's really important to do is like as you're messing with stuff, so let's say we go back to that point light and turn it on. So the point light's on now.
Mhm.
Do profile GPU again. And we look at our volumetric fog cost. Look, it just went up. It's 0.77 now. It was 0.5. And the new cost is this shadowed lights right here because shadowed lights cost more than unshadowed lights. So we just added a quarter millisecond of cost by turning on that large.
That's a
shadow light.
massive difference. So
So just be aware of that. Like
yeah.
as you add shadowed lights, it affects the GPU time, and you can inspect it right there, and you can also look at like how the different resolutions will affect your performance. So let's go up to cinematic now, which we can afford because this is a super beefy machine. But you know you wouldn't actually like ship a game with this probably.
Yeah, like
So it's almost 3 milliseconds now. It's 2.8 milliseconds, and it's a much higher. Remember, it was 140 before. The resolution of the volume texture is much higher now, and
The
all
cost
of these
has
costs went
jumped.
way up because the volume texture is
way
much higher
larger
resolution
now. Mhm.
And also, as a result, the actual light shafts are much more detailed.
you can see there's like very thin. I don't know if it comes out very well across our stream compression, but the difference between these is you can see tons of tiny differences in the density of the light coming through the shaft. So it creates like streaks. But when we're on the high setting, there's not so much streaking, as it's like passing through each individual leaf.
Yeah, the high has a much lower volume resolution, so you don't get as detailed of light shafts, but it runs much faster. So basically, in summary, the performance is completely up to the resolution, and you can basically set it to whatever you want. But we've set some nice presets here in the scalability settings. Okay, so now I'm going to turn down I'm going to show the volume material in action.
Oh, sweet.
So I'm going to turn down the global density. You know, like this whole time I had it jacked up really high, but you probably wouldn't actually ship a game that way because then you can't see to play the game. But you can add density just in some certain areas with the volume material I was showing earlier. So I created an emitter ahead of time, and I'm just going to turn it on, and it takes a little while for the particles to fade in.
There you go. Nice fog kind of rolls in.
Oh, I hate this. Okay.
Are you trying to select the translucent material?
I'm trying to deselect everything. Okay, I got it.
All right, there you go.
So notice that like there's pretty subtle fog everywhere else, but you know I added like a ton of fog right here. And Let me turn this point light back off. So basically, we only have fog in our like low-lying areas down here. That's kind of like the way you want to do it, I think. So you can get a strong effect when you're in it, but you don't just turn it on everywhere globally because it's too strong.
And this creates so much more realism too, just from having variations in the density instead of it being one solid density everywhere. So it's really nice looking.
Yeah. Let me show you what the particle system looks like. I just whipped this together really fast. There's nothing special here, but it has a volume material applied. I spawned them. Initial location is set to a box, and then they're just kind of like slowly falling, and they hang around for a while, for 10 seconds. That's all there is to it. I know I showed that way too fast for anyone to actually look at it.
Actually, can we open up the material real fast? They want to see that material in action.
Here's the material. It's the same one I was showing you before.
Cool.
The simplest possible material. It just does a sphere mask based on particle position, world position, and particle radius. This makes it 0 everywhere outside of the particle, and it's the particle sphere. Because remember, everything in this shader is 3D. It's not a billboard. It's being run on the whole volume.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just masking out extinction to 0 outside of the sphere, and then setting albedo to 1. That's all it is. Normally, you would take your particle color and you would multiply it into albedo, and you would take the particle opacity and you would multiply it into extinction, so that you can actually fade the particles in. But I didn't do that because I was setting up quickly.
That's a good tip, though.
So then you can just take these. You can take these fog emitters, and you can just place them all over the level. It takes a couple seconds for it to come in, and basically you can paint them where you want them to be. That's what I'm trying to get at here. Is you have control over where the fog goes through this method. And now it's not everywhere, but it can still be strong in some places.
Yeah. It's definitely kind of picking up a smokiness.
So these volume materials, they do cost something, and again, we should go and look at the cost, profile GPU, and volumetric fog, and you can see what the cost of it is here. It's 0.18 milliseconds.
Are we on high or epic?
That's a good question because it affects everything.
Yeah, totally.
So we're on the highest one, but because I wasn't actually in it, it didn't cost as much. So if you go in it and you profile GPU. So this is kind of
now it's a lot more expensive too.
It's 3.3 milliseconds, and half a millisecond of that is for the volume material. So just keep in mind while you're setting up these fog particles, just remember the profile so you know how much cost you're adding. Like you don't want a ton of overdraw, just like normal particle effects. You want to use the fewest particles to achieve that effect, because the shader's being run on all the points in the particle. So if you have like 10 overlapping, it's running the shader 10 times. All right, so that's all I want to talk about. Let's do some questions.
All right, you want to do some questions? We'll do some questions. We have quite a few questions that have come in. Thank you all so much for your inquiries. First up, we should probably talk about how volumetric fog works in VR. Because there's just a ton of questions about how it works.
Okay, so there's 3 problems with it right now.
Yes.
First one is that I haven't tested it. I haven't even run it.
Okay,
so it probably doesn't work.
Yes.
The second one is that in the forward renderer, which is what you're probably using for your VR games, all fog is per vertex by default, and volumetric fog obviously it varies a lot with all these light shafts and stuff, so it can't really work per vertex. So by default, volumetric fog looks broken in the forward render. But what you can do is there's a project setting to do fog per pixel, and then you will get the same effect, like as what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
So that's the second problem, and then the third problem is that remember these classes that I was showing in profile GPU.
Yeah.
So right now in VR, it's going to run all 3. It's going to run all 4 of these.
All
for
4
both
of those.
eyes.
Oh yeah.
But really, these first 3, this is like these first 3 only depend on world space positions, so they could actually be done once, and only the final integration needs to be done for each eye.
So you could instantiate it technically.
Yes. And I think, I mean, that's definitely something I'm interested in, is making this thing efficient in VR, because, with VR you can't fake effects with billboards. You really need volumetric effects. And guess what? This is a completely volumetric effect, so it should look amazing in VR. I just need to find some time to work on it.
Yeah, it probably needs a little bit of tweak for instancing for each eye, and then any other performance tricks you can pull off in there.
Some optimization.
Yeah.
Because usually in VR it needs to be 90 FPS,
Mm-hmm.
which is 11 milliseconds.
Yeah.
And I'm showing you right now on this high.
We're already well
it
past
was 3
that.
milliseconds. So
Yeah.
On VR, really, you would run on high,
Yes.
and it would look like this,
Uh-huh.
which doesn't look nearly as good. But there's still some volumetric stuff going on. It's a bit blurry, and then the performance of it would be great. See, it's only 0.2 milliseconds now because it's on high scalability settings.
Oh yeah, you can see like this whole scene is what are we at now for everything?
Everything was 15 milliseconds.
Yeah, so I mean,
it's almost at a VR.
if it wasn't for like a bunch of other stuff in here that's not, I mean, this whole level wasn't built for VR, so
Right.
I mean, I guess
But you
technically
can see that
we
volumetric fog
could.
could easily be afforded in
Yeah.
VR if you use the lowest scalability setting,
That's
which is actually
good.
the same one we use on consoles,
And it looks really good still, so.
and it only costs 1 millisecond on PlayStation 4, which is pretty
Yeah.
good. Yeah. All right. Let's go.
Oh yeah. Next question up here. I've got a few of them here. Does the way the fog generate light data show access to the light data similar to forward shading pass and allows light accumulation in a pixel shader without the need for multiple light passes? I guess that was kind of
Yeah.
what you were.
I understand that question, and it is actually I reused a bunch of the forward shading light structures,
Mhm.
which allow you to loop over lights to implement this. So the forward render calls lights to these like cells on the screen, and then loops over them in the same pass that's evaluating the material, loops over them and computes the shading. So the volumetric fog works in the same way. It's run on like every section of your camera frustum, and then it's looping over the lights that affect that section and computing their shading. However, as soon as you turn on shadowing for a light, it pulls it out of that forward loop, and it does that light in a separate pass, which is part of why it costs so much, so that we can apply that light shadow map. So nobody needs to know any of that stuff. That's purely technical details behind the scenes. If you look at the code, you'll
Lion
see,
really wanted to know, so.
Who?
Lion. Leon. Is a developer who's very interested in
Okay.
this. So.
Like, if you want to look at how it works behind the scenes, that stuff is interesting, but you don't actually need to know any of that to use it. Is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Would you have to like a thing that I like to talk about here is we have a very interesting audience that will totally just come in here and know a lot of things that you wouldn't expect them to know, and so.
Yeah, you get a question about the code.
Yeah,
you're
it's like, oh yeah. It's not.
You know about
there's
that?
not actually a lot of people who are like gamers. Like a lot of people come on here like, oh yeah, they're gonna ask me questions about the games. Like, no. They're gonna ask you some very technical questions about the back end work you did.
Good stuff.
And actually, on that, we probably want to talk a little bit on if I was on very high-end mobile, could I get this to work, or is it something that you wouldn't recommend even on high-end mobile right now?
No, I think it could be afforded.
Yeah.
Because remember, again, the performance of this comes completely from the resolution of that volume texture.
So a low
you
resolution.
can set it low enough that it will be affordable.
Yeah.
However, like at some point it gets so low that you don't want it on it anymore, and it's just like too blobby. That's kind of up to you. But Metal supports Shader Model 5, which is all the features. All of this volumetric fog is implemented with compute shaders, and it uses Shader Model 5 for several things, like the feature set of Shader Model 5. So it can't run on OpenGL ES2, but it can run on Metal Shader Model 5, which I think like the latest mobile devices support that, and that's also used on Mac.
Cool. Let's see. People are asking a few questions about can it be affected physically or collided with if I have a character moving through really dense fog. They want to have that swirling effect, or is that going to be like a particle effect I kind of create in nodes around
so the way
them?
you would do that is you would make a particle system which actually collides with the character, and the particle system is.
So it's kind of like what you
using
have
that
here.
volume.
It's like when you have these poof clouds of particle, you just give those collision, and then you would see that effect in the light.
Yeah.
And that's actually
So-
technically more physically accurate. Is you're hitting the dust, you're not hitting the light, and that's what you're seeing.
Exactly.
So
it's the media. It's called participating media, is what all this stuff is called. It's like there's
Oh.
something in the air that's bouncing the light. So what you can do, remember that thing where I was describing where I made GPU particles and then they settle down to the ground with gravity and then they collide against the ground? It's a simulation on the particles. You can do that same thing for anything. You can, however you move the particles around, then you can have them affect the fog that way. I'm not sure if you can actually pull off swirls that look good because that requires pretty high resolution. You probably need a lot of particles to do that.
Yeah, there might be a way to do it.
That reminds me. So one thing you can do with this whole fog method is you can just, if you set the exponential density to really low, you can basically bypass the existing fog. You know, if you set this down to a low value, then the fog's basically off. And then you can just make one particle that affects the entire camera, and you can put whatever you want in the density function of it. So like Ryan Brooks is using this right now to do like procedural ray marching through, he makes a procedural volume, which he like can paint in VR.
Yeah, we actually had him on for that one. Yeah.
So all of that stuff he can hook that up to this lighting system and get lighting on his volumetrics. I don't know if I described that well, but basically, he's through all of his procedural volume math, he's creating the density function of like how dense are the particles at every point in space, and then he hooks it into the volumetric fog method, and the volumetric fog method computes the lighting and the shadowing for it, and then actually like integrates it toward your eye in an efficient way. So you can bypass this whole global exponential height fog. You can completely bypass it by just setting the density super low, and then you make a full volume, a full camera particle, and you can put whatever you want in there, and you can make like little ray marching scenes.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna have Ryan come on, and we're gonna have to try to do that because that sounds awesome. That would be intense to see. Can't even imagine. Yeah, he showed it off, and by itself was just an absolutely impressive feature to put together. So I can only imagine combining the two techniques. Would you recommend that for performance then? If we were doing like you're doing a mobile game, would it be equally performant or just a completely different setup? Like if I used that, like I built a giant particle and turned my exponential height fog down.
No, it costs a little bit more to do it that way because the global fog is the global density function is still being evaluated.
Okay.
And then you're adding something else on top of it. So it costs a bit more, but it gives you a lot of control. For example, in Fortnite, the artists are using that to reduce the fog when you look up. When you look up at the sky, they can just get rid of the fog completely. It gives you that kind of control. And they also did. There's some like ground level that moves that like you only know that as you're walking around. It's based on the player level, and they also did that to make sure that there's kind of like consistent fog around the level. These are like non-physical density functions that each project, like the artists on each project can stylize it however they want. Can stylize the density of the fog.
That's really cool. And I guess since we're talking about stylizing your fog density, would it be Anand Kumar's was asking if I have like two different volumetric fogs in the same level, like can I do that? And then like why would I want to do that?
So remember that the actual volumetric fog method operates on cameras. It's based on what you see right now. So you can't have two of those unless you have two cameras. But what you can do is you can have lots of these particle emitters. Like I already placed a bunch of them around here. So you can basically have any number of like areas where the fog is denser because they're just particles. They're just particle systems. You can place any number of them, and they all stack up.
All right. So we have a little bit of time. So I'm just going to try to throw in one more here. How would you recommend handling out-of-order transparency rendering in the deferred path? Or is that just like not within scope?
So that's a big area of research, or it's like an unsolved problem.
Yes, it's also Lion is also asking this. Same guy with the other question.
My preferred future solution there is basically per triangle sorting. Right now we're using CPU side per object sorting, which is pretty horrible because you get these translucent objects of different sizes. Like you've got one of them will be like a water sheet that goes through the whole world, and the other one is like the character's hair. How do you sort these guys properly with each other? Well, you won't. and that's why the current project sorting is pretty terrible. And most of the methods that you'll see papers published on are trying to solve that per pixel, but that's actually total overkill. You don't need a linked list per pixel. You don't even need a per pixel solution at all. If you could just sort the triangles in the scene back to front or front to back, depending on your compositing method, then you can solve most of the problems that we have in games today, and you wouldn't have to have all this overhead from like the per pixel linked list. So my personal preference is to sort per triangle, but the problem is that in D311 and D312, there's execute indirect and there's dispatch indirect, but you cannot basically sort each triangle has a different material on it,
Mm-hmm.
and after you've sorted them back to front, the order of those materials, which determines the shader, is no longer the same in the index buffer, and the API doesn't support that basically yet, but maybe in the future it will. And so I'm getting into way too much detail here. Basically, like that's my personal. Everybody on the rendering team kind of has a different opinion on this one, but my personal one is per triangle sorting would be super fast if only we had the API feature that lets you dispatch a different material for variable number of triangles in like one giant sorted index buffer.
All right. I hope that answered your question, Lion. He's
That's probably way. That was probably like way.
No, that's probably exactly what he was looking for. I know him. He loves answers like that. So let's see here. I guess last question here. I feel like we've actually kind of covered that one. Nope. Sorry, I had one in here and then I realized that we kind of covered that question. Let's see here. You already talked about using light functions with the fog.
Yeah, it only works on the directional light.
Only works on the directional light. That's a very...
Which is usually the only place you use light functions. And IES profiles do not yet work on the point spotlights, but that's something that can be supported and I hope to get to.
Okay, very cool.
Because normally what you do is you use a light function on the directional light for cloud shadows, and then you use IES profiles on the point spotlights to give them like an interesting light profile.
Mm.
Like, the glass on the case of the light adds like a caustic pattern to the light. That's what the IES profile does.
Yeah.
You can see it in like any real world lights.
Yeah, I've made some. They're fun.
So I definitely want to support those. Haven't got to it yet. Yeah. Wasn't there a question about any ways to make the light shafts more visible? While not making the fog in your level so dense. So I covered what I think is the answer to that.
Yeah, you kind of covered that one with
a bit. But by like only placing the density in certain areas with the particles, but there's definitely this is kind of like an area of research where there's definitely some opportunities for us to give like non-physically based tweakables for artists that make it stronger while not having the fog so dense everywhere, that make the light shaft effect look more noticeable. But honestly, like I kind of haven't figured out what those should look like yet. So
send us your suggestions.
Yeah, maybe if we find one later, maybe it might be like a tone mapping function on the computed fog result that just like if the fog is dense brings it down, and if the fog is light brings it up. Maybe like just a contrast curve on the computed fog result would help with that. I'm not quite sure yet. Another thing that you can do is you basically make the fog only dense near the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, you often only notice these light shafts when you're kind of like in it, and it's like close to you. So what you can do is with that full screen particle that I was talking about, you can actually make the fog less dense away from the viewer, and it's non-physical, but yet you get kind of like light shafts that are only near the camera.
Hmm.
So maybe that can be an avenue of getting the noticeable light shafts without actually having strong fog everywhere.
You can really see the noise grain in that one.
Yeah. This is a good. I wanted to show what the temporal projection actually does. So I put it on high now, which is the lowest settings, and because my view distance is so high. There aren't very many slices going through here. If I lower my view distance, it gets a bit better. But let me show you what this looks like remember, this is the lowest. These are the lowest scalability settings, and this is a very difficult case for the volumetric fog. So you do see some artifacts here, but let me show you what it looks like if you actually turn the temporal reprojection off. If we didn't have temporal reprojection.
Whoa. Yeah, that's not cool.
The reason it's flickering is because these guys are moving slightly,
Oh.
which is causing aliasing in the shadow map, which turns into aliasing in the volumetric fog. See, this occluder is not moving, so its shadow stays fixed, but yet the shadow is still very. It has all these. It's very aliased, has all these lines in it. So the temporal reprojection allows us to super sample the shadow and smooth it out and remove a lot of that flickering. And remember, that was all on the lowest scalability setting. On a higher scalability setting, you can make all that stuff look much better. But that just shows how important the temporal reprojection is to this whole technique, which is why it's on by default.
Yeah.
Now I switch over to cinematic, and it looks much better.
Super nice. Yeah.
Much better.
Cool. Cool. So I think that about covers it for today. We had a whole bunch of great questions coming in. We'll have to throw some of these up on the forums as well to see if we can't have you come follow up on a couple of these. But I guess the last thing that we'll leave off on is anything out there in the wild that you know of that's already trying to implement this, like I guess our own games, or something we can be looking out for where we can see this out in the wild?
Yeah, I saw some really cool looking. Some people tweeted some really cool looking GIFs and screenshots, but I can't remember the name of any of them.
Oh yeah, we
you put me on the spot.
You put it out there, but like we had a whole bunch of like
if you
those
go out
random
right now and you just search volumetric fog, there's some really cool looking stuff.
Cool. Cool. Can we? Do you think we can expect to see this in a couple of our games too?
Absolutely. It's already in.
Oh, here we go.
Fortnite. And.
Thanks, buddy.
It's already in Fortnite, and Paragon will be using it. We'll be using it once it gets to the artists. Okay, these are not.
No, I don't think there's gonna be a
sorry.
ton. You'd have to type in like Twitter, and UE4. Yeah, and you also might want to have to do it sort by date. But I wasn't sure if you had any off the top of your head. Oh God.
Was I not supposed to show your Twitter? Okay, if you just search Volumetric Fog on Twitter, it's like people.
Oh, there we go.
Look, UE4.
Oh yeah, Lucas has some great stuff. But cool. So look out for
And
it
this
in
is UE4.
Paragon, and also go on Twitter and
And
look
this
at
is
all the
UE4.
things.
That's not UE4. That's not UE4. But you can see that
Mhm.
that lots of people are trying it out. And
Oh, there we
they're
go. Yeah,
finding
that was like
cool-
some of like the first ones that we saw pop up.
Oh, this is in
Hmm.
the kite demo.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's actually
I
in
never
the
even
kite
tested
demo.
In the kite demo. It's always awesome when you see your feature working properly in a case that you did not test.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I guess we have to also ask the community, like, hey, try throwing it into VR and see what happens, and all those other great things. Like you said, you hadn't even had a chance to throw it into
Yeah,
that.
I knew. Oh, I do want to mention one thing, which is that I don't have shadowing of the participating media implemented, but that would be a cool feature. So what happens is, as you make the fog more dense, like these particles down here, they don't actually cast shadows themselves on the world. See,
Oh my gosh, no,
see,
it
it's
just
the same
like,
brightness here.
Yeah.
There should be a shadow here.
It should be like slightly
from
more
all
dense.
that fog we're looking
yeah.
through, but there isn't, and that's something that I want to implement, and it will allow you to make kind of like clouds. They'll still be like a bit blurry clouds, but it will allow you to make clouds that have more realistic lighting. If you make this stuff dense enough, it doesn't look as good because it's lacking that shadowing.
Yeah, yeah, and now we have like we have a couple examples of self-shadowing clouds and a couple of particles and whatnot. But there's like one of them that you can tell is cards, and then that one doesn't really look so great. So yeah, this could be interesting to see like a real physical shadows coming off of like dense fog. So
yeah, it would be a volumetric method. So all right, I'll just listen.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really fascinating though. We might have to like have you written any papers on it yet? Because I feel like
No, actually, this whole implementation is based off of Bart Ronsky's who works at Ubisoft. It was first used in Black Flag, and he published a great presentation on it at I think SIGGRAPH, and basically he paved the way for everybody else. He made it really easy, and also Sebastian Hilaire at DICE made a presentation called Unified Volumetric Lighting in Frostbite. That was a couple years ago at SIGGRAPH, and these two guys made it. They basically made the information of how to implement this available for everybody.
Oh, that's so
so
cool.
So that it's really easy to do. So to be honest, this was not the hardest. Of the things I've implemented in UE4, this was not the hardest one of them, because those guys figured out a lot of the hard parts and they shared it with everybody.
Paved the way for you, and you just kind of like implemented your own flavor of it.
Yeah, and
that's very cool.
I mean, obviously, there was a lot of difficulty implementing this because integrating it into our complex renderer, which has a lot of features, was difficult. But no, so no, you were asking like, am I going to write a paper about it? Definitely not, because like those guys nailed it.
Yeah.
And the whole graphics programming community has benefited from their sharing of their information. Awesome. So be on the lookout for those papers. They're out there in the wild, so that's cool. But that's what we have for today as far as time-wise, and also your presentation was awesome, by the way. Thank you so much for showing off how it works on the back end and how to implement it yourself. We'll probably have to have you come on, and we'll do like some fun tutorials, sometime or something. We'll put together some silly scene and show people as you've come out with more features for it, what all it can do. Oh, I love to see people's use cases of it.
Oh yeah.
So please don't hesitate to send me
to put them on Twitter.
Stuff on Twitter.
Shoot it to both of us. I'd love to highlight it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love. It's always, as a graphics programmer, one of the coolest things about the job is when you see somebody make something way cooler than you thought was possible with the thing you made. So go crazy.
Yeah, go crazy. And fog cars, that's what you should definitely take away from this.
No fog cars.
So yeah, we'll see you all around next time. See you Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, or Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. That's when we do our live streams. And thank you again, Daniel. This was really excellent. So we'll see you all. Bye-bye now.